Hello, Rattling friends! Today I want to sit down and make another open discussion video. Not only because the filler video was actually really effective and, I love reading your responses, but because recently I got a couple of questions, one on YouTube and a couple more on Tumblr, asking for my opinion on Purple Prose. Now, the problem with asking me about Purple Prose, the same way that is difficult to answer questions about filler, is that the answer is not objective. It's entirely colored by a person's opinion and their biased stances and how they feel about things. So I thought that instead of just giving you what I think, I thought, you know what, let's actually make a conversation as always. Let's ask a few questions, let's hear what everyone has to say, and then, let's make a conversation. Let's see what we can learn from each other as a group, as opposed to just me telling you what I think. Let's talk about writing. In this case, let's talk about Purple Prose. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with my Let's Talk videos, this is the way the video is gonna work. This is not a lecture, there is no right or wrong. We're just gonna answer a few questions and then share our opinions. I'm going to define what the questions are for today's video, and I will share my subjective and biased opinion. And when the video is done, you can go into the comments below and share your thoughts. Share with me and with the rest of the viewers what you think of Purple Prose, and together, find a better solution that works for everyone as opposed to just me and my opinion. Which brings me to my next point. Before we go anywhere else, allow me to first give you the formal disclaimer, as always, that the following is merely just my advice, my opinion, and what worked for me. Do not take it as gospel, it is merely just my subjective and biased opinion. With that being said, let's actually talk about today's questions. Today we have 4 questions, because Purple Prose is a very complicated subject, and the questions go a little bit like this. The first question is, what do you define as Purple Prose? The second question is, what is your experience with it? The third question is, how do you feel about it? And the final question is, if you could rename Purple Prose to something else, what would you call it? Now, I wanted to start today's video with the definition of Purple Prose, because I find that a lot of the questions that I get revolve around explaining what Purple Prose is. Because I find, and we'll talk more about it in my personal experience, that people use Purple Prose as a catch-all term, as a big word that they just drop as opposed to actually explaining their feedback. And I've had this myself where people had just basically said, hey, this chunk here is Purple Prose, cut it out, as opposed to actually telling you why they didn't like it. Now, what do I define as Purple Prose? I think that Purple Prose is very closely related to filler. While filler is content that is put in a story while it is not actually directly related to the plot, or does not provide any sort of meaningful addition to the story, I find that Purple Prose is the description variant of that. My personal way of defining Purple Prose is this. If after reading a huge chunk of description, I find myself asking myself, wait, what were we talking about? I think that is Purple Prose, because ultimately, for me, Purple Prose is distracting description that distracts you from the main narrative. And of course, this doesn't mean that it's a lot of description. It could actually be a little segment of description that is so contrasting to everything else in the narrative that it just throws you out of the entire story. Again, I don't think that Purple Prose is always about length. I think Purple Prose can also be about the nature of the description itself. And if it's so contrasting, it could throw you out of the story as easily as, pages upon pages of description. Now, what is my experience with Purple Prose? The problem that I have with Purple Prose is not actually the problem itself, is the way people use the word. Because I have found in my experience, and basically every time that I've heard the word Purple Prose being thrown around, it's been thrown around by people who don't want to justify their opinion. Now, those of you who have been following my blog for ages know one of my little personal facts, and that is that I believe communication is key to all relationships. That includes the relationship between you and the person you're giving feedback to. That is why whenever I give feedback to somebody or I read their work, I go out of my way to describe my opinion and how I felt about things. Because ultimately, you don't want to end up in a situation where the person who's receiving feedback doesn't know what you mean. And that is the problem with Purple Prose, because all of the questions that I got are from people saying, people told me my writing is Purple Prose, but I don't know what it means because they didn't explain what it means. Again, communication. I mean, if you're giving somebody feedback, you might as well explain to them how you feel about things. And just calling something Purple Prose is as ineffective and as meaningless, because again, it's an entirely subjective term, as calling somebody a Mary Sue. It's like, you have told me nothing. Explain to me why you didn't like things. And I find, personally, in my opinion, that Purple Prose is thrown around by people who don't feel their opinion is objective enough, so they just basically claim an ultimate statement. This here is bad. That's really, Purple Prose means I didn't like this bit of description. Because again, Purple Prose is not an objective statement. Again, I personally feel that Purple Prose is the sort of description that distracts you from the story, but everyone has different thresholds. So instead of calling something Purple Prose, I personally would just tell you how I feel. Like, I would say, hey, this segment of the description is, to me, was unrelated to the main plot, and it distracted me because I didn't know where you were going with this. And by the end of that, I was lost and I had forgotten where we were. I think that's more meaningful than saying Purple Prose. Again, communication is important in all relationships. Now this brings me to the next question, how do I feel about it? I find that just like filler, it has to be so excessive to the point that, or so excessive that it eclipses everything else. That to me comes to the point where I lose the faith on the writer, because I always give the writer the benefit of the doubt, because I find that the writer knows more of the story than I do as the reader, so I like to trust the writer. I like to give them the benefit of the doubt. But if it comes to the point where, in this case, description as opposed to filler, which is just events happening, in this case, if the description eclipses everything else, I find myself losing faith and starting to question the narrative. I get thrown out of it. The next thing you know, I don't know where we are and I'm a little bit lost. But again, that is so excessive that I have seldom experienced that. Why? Because when I'm in the middle of reading, I like to give the writer the benefit of the doubt until they prove me wrong. Like I said in the video about filler, I found that Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov had a lot of filler to it. A lot of it. But it worked within the narrative. That is why, like I grew up on magical realism, and magical realism has a lot of flowery language and ornate language, but it works with the rest of the story. So even then, you have to give the writer the benefit of the doubt in their own process, because you can't expect people to write the way you want them to write. Which is another problem with Purple Prose, because it usually boils down to people saying, hey, this is too much description for me. And not gonna lie to you, I'm the sort of person, I love description. That is my thing, and I love writing description, because to me, yes, I understand that telling a story is sharing facts. That's what it boils down to. But to me, my favorite part is bringing you into that place, describing the location, and more importantly, to me, I don't do so much description of places and things, but my thing, I love describing emotion. I love putting you there because I think that emotion is such a subjective thing. It's different to everyone else. So whenever I read a particular passage of something and somebody simply says, this character is angry. How are they angry? Like, let me see them angry. I read the story for the drama and the emotions and what's going on. I'm not into the story for the facts. If not, I would just read the Wikipedia summary. I'm into the story for enjoying it, for submerging myself into that world and seeing what comes. So you can understand that for me, description is a very meaningful part of storytelling, and I would be a huge hypocrite if I went around throwing the word Purple Prose around. I have never used that word. I have simply called things how I felt about them. Again, it's because I like description, I enjoy writing description, and I enjoy reading description as well. Again, this is one of those things where everyone's opinion on writing affects their outlook on this term. So how do I feel about Purple Prose? Like right now in summary, I feel that the main problem with the term is the term itself. Because it's like the same thing as like subjective terms like that. Just throwing them around gains you absolutely nothing. Like if you're giving somebody feedback and you just say, this here is Purple Prose, fix it. That has told them absolutely nothing. And again, like I mentioned, communication, okay? And the same way goes for storytelling itself. If there's something that is so important that you need to tell the reader, it's important enough that you can describe it. Before I go any further and I basically break into a ranting about adverbs and how much I despise them, let's actually answer the final question. If I could rename Purple Prose to something else, what would I call it? I would call it distracting description. For me, it has to be either so excessive and so long or so contrasting to the narrative itself that it throws me out of the story. It makes me question what is going on. It's like, okay, who's writing now? The writing style completely changed, or wow, this has been going on for so long that I don't know where we are anymore. Again, I would call it distracting description, which I think is, if anything, a little bit more revealing or insightful than just calling something Purple Prose. With that being said, if you would like to share your opinions on the questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I can't wait to read them. The conversation on filler was actually really fun, and a couple of you raised some really good points. So I think that this video is going to be even better because Purple Prose is such a subjective subject that It's such a subjective subject. I'm so funny. But, like, silliness aside, I actually do mean it, because Purple Prose is, and no offense to whoever came up with the term, but it's kind of meaningless. It is kind of a meaningless term because all of the little dials and knobs are based on someone's opinion. So, how do you define excessive? How do you define flowery? How do you define ornate, right? I mean, some people write poetry and are okay with flowery language. Some people don't, and they're not okay with it. It's such a meaningless word to me. That's why I feel like the last question is necessary, because I think that the problem with purple prose is ultimately the term itself. But if you disagree, or if you have a point that you would like to raise, please leave it in the comments below. Like, I'm not kidding you, I want to read your opinions, because I feel that this is one of those things in which, together, we can arrive at a better point, at a better idea, at a better understanding of things. And of course, you know how I feel? Communication is so important. So, let's talk about Purple Prose. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe if you want more. And if you would like even more writing advice, positivity, and prompts, head over to my writing blog over at maxkieran.tumblr.com. Thank you for watching, thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me, and I hope to be seeing you and reading your thoughts soon. Mwah! Okay, by the way, before I leave, fun fact. The one time that I heard someone really, let's say really passionately throwing the word purple prose around, it was this one person who I had in a writing class who was a journalism major, and she just appeared to hate description in general. It was really weird, to the sort of extent that any sort of description that even touched on being slightly flowery just immediately turned her off. It was a really weird experience, and if anything, it just showed me even more accurately that everyone has different tastes, everyone writes the sort of content they would like to create, and I think that if you're giving somebody feedback, you should keep that in mind. You should keep in mind that your feedback is not ultimate, that, it's not about good or bad, it's about what worked for you and what did not work for you. So, wow, there you go. There's a little extra note. Max talks about how to give feedback. Yeah, I was about to do the outro again, which would have been really silly because I already did.